everyone. Welcome back to It's a Lot, Let's Talk. I'm Kylie,
And I'm JP.
and today we wanted to talk about the family reality and navigating care while you're living your life. So we're shifting the focus to families caring for aging parents rather than maybe employees. And we want to discuss how most people don't plan to become caregivers. It just kind of happens. It falls into their lap. It's often triggered by a specific moment, maybe a fall, a diagnosis, or a discharge from the hospital. And it suddenly can, from this moment of crisis, shift into something that lasts much longer than just this one moment of crisis. You can be caring for an aging parent for quite a long time, and while that's a beautiful thing you get to do, it's also very hard on the family caregiver. So,
Stressful as heck, right? Like,
yeah.
yeah, taking care of both. And just generationally, I think, we got these sandwich generation that are not only taking care of their parents or one of their parents, but their kids as well. So it's a stressful, difficult thing. But at the same time can be rewarding, like you said,
Yeah.
but challenging nonetheless, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, most of the time you don't enter it prepared. You just are kind of
Oh,
thrown into it. You're in the
yeah,
thick of it and you have to figure it out while trying to figure it out. So, like we've
right,
said before on this podcast, is you don't know what you don't know. So,
right. Absolutely.
if you don't know your
And yeah,
resources or how to plan
yeah,
ahead of time,
right.
how do you know what to do?
And depending on the culture, right,
Yeah.
the degree of involvement kind of varies. Depending on the gender, we know women, typically become the caregiver more so than the men,
Right.
for whatever unfair reason there is. But just seems to kind of play out that way. So yeah, depending on your situation, where you're coming from, you could have greater impact than in other situations. But whatever, regardless of where you're coming from, it's I was going to use the word burden, but I won't use the word burden because it has a negative connotation. But in a way, it seems like a burden at times, from my own experience.
Yeah.
Felt guilty for even thinking that, and I think that has a psychological play on had a psychological play on me. But it's just it's a reality, right? It's
Hmm.
not going to visit your parents this weekend. You're kind of having to make check in on them on a regular basis, and that can be challenging at the best of times.
Yeah, and I think caregiver guilt is huge. And I can imagine hard to navigate. I've never experienced it myself. However,
Mhm.
I can only imagine what it's like trying to juggle caring for your parents and also be present for your kids, but also trying to show up for yourself.
Right.
Like
Right.
that's a
Yeah.
lot to handle.
And regardless of age, whether there's some young people that are taking care of grandparents, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's irrelevant. And even if you're not doing it full time or it's episodic because of where you're at, there's still a drain, there's still involvement and so forth. So it could be challenging. And so being able to cope with that is obviously key. And then like we talked about in the past about balancing that with your regular life, not even your work life,
Hmm.
just your personal life, it takes away from all of that. So uh,
Absolutely.
it's here to stay for sure. It's a
Yeah.
trend that will keep going.
And there's some great resources out there for caregivers trying to manage everything, which we obviously highly recommend all caregivers take a look at. But I guess we're talking about burden and like how much everyone's struggling. We should probably take a step back and discuss what families are actually managing and what that looks like. So when we talk about burden, or without the negative connotation, when we talk about like everything that a family caregiver has to do, that can look like coordinating appointments and follow-ups, worrying about the safety of their parent when they're out of the house or not presently with them, medication management, making sure that they've taken their meds on time and are they taking the right medication on time? Did they
Hmm.
miss a day? Did they drop one? They can't bend down to pick it up. And then also managing finances and paperwork. That can be a whole different ballgame. But also managing different appointments too. If there is a moment of crisis and you find yourself um, with maybe a new diagnosis, you are probably going to be sent to multiple different specialists, multiple different appointments with your doctor, trying to figure everything out. So trying to communicate with different providers. Like we don't have a streamlined system here in Ontario, and like ultimately, I think that would be an amazing goal to work towards, but it's
Yeah.
not the reality that these family caregivers live in. So, on
Yeah.
top of that, family dynamics is huge. Like balancing what you feel your parent needs on top of maybe like what your sibling thinks your parent needs can be very different.
Yeah. 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 Yeah, no
There's-
question.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an advantage, of course, if you have multiple siblings and they're all involved, of source. But there's, yeah, you're right. The disadvantage, like who decides? I know in my personal instance, I've got two sisters. One of them entrenched in the healthcare system, which was extremely helpful. And we'll talk a bit more about that later on. But it was extremely helpful. But hey, they have their own perspectives, their own ways of dealing with things.
Hmm.
And I knew up front we had to figure out what was the best way to deal with this if we had differing opinions. And, I remember chatting with my sisters and saying, okay, there's three of us, fortunately, it's not four, so there'll never be a tie. But if we vote and it's 2-1, we go with the 2-1 regardless, unless the other person thinks it's going to be irreparable harm. But so a lot of times they made decisions without me because they both agreed. And I was okay with that. But going into
Right.
that is what's key.
Yeah. And being respecting your siblings'
Mm,
perspective and sort of, I guess, your sister being a nurse herself, using that to your advantage. Not everybody has that, right? Like not everybody
yeah.
necessarily respects their siblings' decisions, so that could be pretty difficult to
Yeah, and then
navigate.
you talk about continuity of care, consistency, all of that. Yeah, that's messed up. Like it could
Yeah,
be very, very challenging. So,
absolutely.
what do you think? How do you deal with that? Like if there's some dysfunction in your relationship and you're starting to think about your parents who are aging and you don't disagree, how do you manage that process?
Yeah, that's a great question. At this point in my life, I'm lucky enough to not have to
Hmm.
sort of juggle that, but I don't know. I think you have to step back and put your ego aside and really say to yourself, really say, what is in the best interest of my parents? How
Hmm.
maybe like how would they want to be cared for? How would they react in the situation if they were able to uh like cognitively process everything? Yeah, I guess I would say just try and put your ego aside as best as possible. Easier
Yeah.
said than done for a
Sure.
lot of people, but
Yeah.
oftentimes I think family dynamics and maybe like stubbornness from yourself or from your siblings can come from like obviously personal
Hmm.
things you have against each other, but uh, really, really trying to put your parent at the forefront of what is best for them. And
Right.
am I just standing on or like standing behind this opinion because I'm stubborn or whatever it is? I don't know. It can be different for so many people, but
Right.
working in the home healthcare field, I've definitely seen some family dynamics.
Mhm.
Getting a third party involved is never a wrong decision if maybe it's two siblings or four siblings and you have differing opinions, you all stand on different sides, so
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
don't know. I don't think it's a bad idea to ever get a health professional involved when they obviously know more than, say, you would know, because
Hmm.
oftentimes you get thrown into these situations without having any idea of what it is you're expected to do. And making decisions with sort of incomplete information is not always the best route.
Right. Absolutely. And I think we've alluded to this before. Have that have that conversation with your parents before they get to the stage where they care and what they're looking for. You're trying to
Yeah.
find a common and we I think as a society we talk about this. I know I never spoke to my parents proactively. I don't know what my sisters did, but I know my mother talked about how she wanted to be taken care of towards the end, you
Hmm.
know, and what she found acceptable and so forth. But I don't know if a lot of people do have that conversation, and especially when you're dealing with siblings, if you're able to get an understanding, okay, this is the perspective of our parent and how they want to be treated, that may help to align, viewpoints or, but like you said, it's personal. and its personality, and there's issues. And I always said, every family is dysfunctional, and it's to what degree that dysfunction exists. And if it's more
Hmm.
dysfunctional, it's going to be more difficult. If it's less dysfunctional, it's not. But if you're in a dysfunctional family and siblings, it's not working out, you got to try to put that to the side and think about what's best for the parent or the
Hmm.
individual in that situation. Not easy, but something that is important. And that's why I always recommend to the people that I come across is to figure out what they're looking for, how they want to be treated before it's too late for them to say, hey, I want to be treated this way and so forth.
Yeah, having those conversations early and trying to understand maybe the process that your parents would want to go through when they get there. I mean, obviously, things can change as
Mm.
time goes on, and that's a different situation you obviously have to navigate. But yeah, all of it is not easy by any means.
No, no,
By
and you said to me I was fortunate, which I was. I had a sister in the healthcare system. But what have you seen over the years in terms of families coming to you and saying, "Hey, we need care for our parent," and how things kind of rolled over from that and say, "Yeah, we need care, but there's also other issues we don't know. Can you kind of support us?" What were some of the key things that you saw, if anything at all, from families in terms of navigating the system?
I think the hardest situation to navigate is we live in a society where people are scared of aging. Like
Mm,
aging has such a negative connotation around it, where it's actually like such a beautiful process. You just move on to a different situation in your life. You've maybe retired and you can focus on like what fun you can have during the day. Like, sure, your body is changing, but your body has been changing since you were a child. So I think accepting that aging is beautiful and not scary has been something that I've tr come across and tried to sort of shift the narrative. Now people will believe whatever they want to believe based on what they hear. Um, but honestly, the biggest thing I've encountered is people are just scared.
mm,
Rightfully so, it's very
mm,
scary. You reach this point where all of a sudden your parent is maybe no longer independent,
mhm.
but you're doing the right thing by reaching out for help. So,
And I guess like you said too, the anchor is obviously the family practitioner, if you're fortunate enough to have one in Ontario, right, these days.
yeah,
But that's definitely a starting point. I know that started with us going to the family, and then you get referred to a geriatrician or whoever it may be, or
right.
a home care agency and so forth. So for those that are fortunate enough, and I can't believe we're saying in this day and age, to have a family doctor,
Yeah.
it seems like a great starting point in terms of starting to navigate what's going on. Because the system is complex. It's so disconnected, and that's what makes it challenging, and so forth. We don't have a kind of a universal medical record keeping system. It's
Right.
kind of compartmentalized, and that makes it more challenging. So you talk to one specialist or practitioner, and they have the information, and they don't share with the next one, and so forth. So that definitely is something that we experience. But talking to your family practitioner has always worked for me.
Mm-hmm.
If you,
Yeah.
like I said, if you're fortunate to have it.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, just talking to any sort of health professional can be beneficial because they're in the field. They hopefully have some resources to provide you, but if they don't, they may know someone who can help
Hmm.
you out and they can point you in the right direction a little better. And
It's a
that,
small world. People are connected, right? Especially in the
yeah,
healthcare, right?
absolutely, absolutely. And navigating the system is very challenging. And I've
Hmm.
always sort of daydreamed about a system that's streamlined where you can go to one place and you can get whatever it is that you need, and everyone has all the information that they need to treat you in the best way possible. And
Right.
unfortunately, we just don't have that. And hopefully, we can work towards that and fill
Yeah.
that gap
Hmm.
and ultimately provide our communities with better health care.
Yeah. And one of the things that I found out too is my mother was on her own. And so what was her eligibility for even some of the services that are, publicly
Yeah.
paid for? And trying to figure out that. And I know I have friends and colleagues who have used care coordinators, which is kind of
Yeah.
interesting. So if you know nothing at all about the system and you haven't navigated it yourself and you're kind of entering in the first time, care coordinators within the community can kind of help you do that. And they walk you through the various things. Now, there's a cost to that.
Yeah.
It's not free,
Costly.
um,
Yeah.
but it's definitely an option if you have the means to do that. The public system, here in Ontario, health at home, if you kind of check the boxes in certain areas in terms of your conditions and you're eligible, you obviously get connected to a coordinator, within
Hmm.
your community, and they help you with that. But, I've heard experiences from that's taken forever just to get feedback from them and so forth. Not because, they're not effective, it's just that the caseloads they have, the number of people required.
Hmm.
So patience is really important. So I think, in terms of navigating the system is try to do, and that's where you even said earlier, it fights human nature, is to kind of be preemptive as much as possible, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we know you said we're going to get old, right? I still haven't accepted that, but you said we're going to get old and I'm going to get old. And so preemptively, what can we kind of factor in and not for
Yeah.
ourselves maybe, but at least for our parents. And that's really key. And then kind of entering the system, whatever that looks like, with a little bit of knowledge versus coming in cold. So a couple of ways or strategies you can kind of do that.
Mhm. And there's definitely ways you can set yourself up for success
Hmm.
in that situation, and that is truly one of them. But I can
Yeah,
only imagine how overwhelming it is in that situation, going to multiple appointments or constantly having to advocate for whatever it is that's going on and being drained at the end of it, like, oh,
right. Absolutely.
again, or like no answers, or you mentioned having patience. Well, I mean, I can only imagine how scary it is to have this new diagnosis and then you're expected to have patience. You're like, well, why can't I just go to my next doctor's appointment and get this information right away? Well, no, you have to wait for scans or tests or whatever it is. It's
Right.
in that waiting period, I can't imagine that is
Right.
exciting by any
Yeah.
means.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's a
And,
lot of
and
emotional strain and stress for
yeah,
everybody involved.
yeah, yeah. Other advice too that I would probably give, and it's more so probably in the last, I don't know, 5 years, decade, is there are a lot of caregiver organizations out there,
Hmm.
right? And if you just went on to Google or chat and just put in, Ontario caregivers or wherever you're located and put that in, there's a lot of associations, a lot of organizations, nonprofit that have resources and support mechanisms in place to help people that are kind of going through this
Hmm.
more so than ever before. And I think what's the stat now? Over 4 million unpaid caregivers in Canada alone. And we talked about
Hmm.
that previously. So there are resources that you can go to and to kind of get help in figuring this out. Some of them have helplines that you can call into. There's the Alzheimer's Society that you can kind of tap into. That's across Canada at least. That's
Yeah.
in different regions. So, it's becoming aware that you're going to need some help at one point, and then it's becoming aware of what resources are available. And there's a lot of resources, but there are some kind of central organizations and nonprofits or charities that can help you out. And it's just being aware of that because we don't know what we don't know until we talk to somebody. So I think, the biggest thing is to realize that if something happens to your parent and they need care, you're not alone. This is more common, and I don't know why I chuckle because maybe it was nervous energy, but like I'm not unique. My mother is not unique in this kind of scenario. It's happening
Hmm.
everywhere. And so knowing that there are resources out, it's just putting yourself out there and willing to go and kind of find it. And you can find help. The system
Hmm.
is challenging for sure, but at least as a starting point, you can reach out to something or someone or an organization to help you out with what direction you need to go.
Hmm. Absolutely. But I find that oftentimes it's hard for people to ask for help. And I don't know if that's human nature or what it is, but when you're in these tricky situations, asking for help is not easy. So I do think it's very noble and strong of these people who are reaching out and sort of seeing what's out there in the community and And I came across this, I don't know, I don't know the source, I don't know the facts, but I came across this piece of information the other week that oftentimes it's found that the deeper you are into crisis, the less likely you are to ask for help. And I don't know why that would be. I haven't wrapped my head around it fully. I would assume that when you're sort of dealing with such an intense situation, you would be more likely to reach out. But it makes you wonder, right? Like,
Mm.
again, I
Yeah,
don't know the
I
source of
think that
that,
has
but
something. Yeah, I think that has something to do with cognitive load or whatever
yeah,
that's, kind of impeding your ability
sort of
to
some
think
blinders
straight or to
on.
reach out. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
And that's again, we go back to it's about how can you prepare, and that's the challenge. How do you prepare for something that you don't want to happen?
yeah,
First of all, you're going to be
exactly.
motivated to do that. But in reality, it's going to happen, just the nature of life. And
Yeah.
so, having a plan, at least a general loose plan in
Mm-hmm.
terms of what your parents want is really important. And I know my mother wanted to be treated a certain way if she lost her memory or, what she looked like even. And she would talk to us about that. But that's having those conversations.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have to be direct, they can be indirect, they can be casually kind of explored. But
Yeah.
I think it helped us kind of know that, yeah, my mother wanted this, but not this, or she liked this or not this, and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just up to the individual to kind of take that proactive approach. And you're
Mm-hmm.
right. When the crisis happens, that's the whole point of this thing, right? That's why we're talking about what we're talking. If that is true, and I can't, I think I recall a study about that. While we're in crisis, it's difficult to, to do make action. How can we prepare for that as much as possible so that when it does happen, the unfortunate inevitable, that we at least have some sort of plan. So,
Right.
yeah.
It's just convincing people to actually prepare for it and
Right.
not be scared of the process because
Right.
it's going to help you in the long run.
Right. And when it comes to that, men are the worst. Like even with our own health, with my own health, right? I'd rather put it to the side and not talk about it,
Yeah.
than talk about it. So, yeah. Was it easier with my mother talking about? I was more reactionary. I can't lie. I was not proactive. And but as a result of that, went through an emotional roller coaster. And as I look back
Right.
and reflect on it, was there any way of minimizing that impact? And I think there was certain things that we
Well,
could have done and prepared for.
hindsight's 2020, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Making decisions when you don't have all the information or you have no idea what's going to happen next is not easy, and
Right.
there's a huge impact on the family caregiver, again, not just emotional strain and stress, but like we mentioned previously, guilt and impact on your career and relationships and sleep disruption, which then spirals you more into not making proper decisions and feeling socially isolated when you really aren't. There's lots out there for you in terms of support. So,
And if you had a list and you were to put some items on the list that you can kind of give to a family, what are some of those items that you'd put on there, like in terms of tools or resources or even, motivational kind of tips as they start to go or maybe going through this process of taking care of a.
hmm. Early stages, I would say, like start your research. Research doesn't hurt. Store it
Mhm.
in your brain somewhere safe for maybe down the line when you need it. Maybe look at what supports are in your area. Some caregiver supports. I know there's great organizations out there. Like you said, just Google Ontario caregiver support or whatever it is. So maybe have that in your back pocket. Maybe a care coordinator. Um, any type of educational resources and awareness is great. There's, like you mentioned, some helplines if you're planning early, obviously, or maybe you don't need that helpline early, but just educating yourself before it happens. But most importantly, I would say start taking care of yourself first. And if you start early before things happen, hopefully you're able to continue that pattern and that habit into when you are caring for someone else. Because you know what they say when you're on an airplane, always put your oxygen mask on first because you can't
Mhm.
care for someone else if you haven't cared for yourself. So
Yeah.
first and foremost, put yourself at the forefront of everything. Take care of you so you can show up properly for your parent or whoever it is you're caring for, so you don't have any, I don't want to say regrets, but so you don't have any, oh, I wish I did that, or oh, I should have done this in the future.
Right.
And I mean, maybe it's hard, but maybe work towards not feeling some of that guilt. Like try
Mm,
and set up some, well, no, easier said than done for sure, but like taking care of yourself, you should not feel guilty for doing that before caring for your parents. So
right.
trying to
Absolutely.
work through that, maybe get a
Yep.
good therapist. I don't know.
Yeah, for sure. No question. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I equate, financial planning, right? So if you look at financial
That,
planning, in eventually you're not going to be able to work, or you may not want to work, or you want to do it, and we start to plan. That's kind of ingrained for the most
mhm,
part into our culture, at least within the last 10, 20 years. And I think that's the same when it comes to aging, whether it's for yourself or whether it's your parent. Eventually, there's going to be a time when we're all going to need some help. And so, what does that look like? What do we need to gather in the meantime, and so forth? So, use that analogy. I think with financial planning, and we're even seeing in Ontario schools today, like just the notion of being financially literate is
yeah.
entered into the curriculum. I think, from societally speaking, as we start to age, what can we do to prepare? So if we use that
Mhm.
parallel, maybe there's a little more motivation to do something about it. But I agree with you. Don't feel guilty. As a caregiver, you're doing the best you can. You're the child, right? I hope everybody feels obligated, that they have a good enough relationship to say, "Hey, I want to support my parents." But
Mhm.
you can't feel guilty. But if you have things in place, it'll lessen the load incredibly.
Absolutely. It's funny you brought up the financial aspect though, because they do say women tend to be sort of the emotional caregivers and men tend to be the financial
Mm,
caregivers. So
yeah,
funny you
so,
brought that up,
so,
but
so
I
true.
think just finding every tool possible out there, whether that's networking or Google, whatever it is,
Yeah.
ask your family practitioner early on so you can prepare yourself and sort of build your confidence that you're like the more you know, the better you'll hopefully feel about it.
Mhm.
It could be
Mhm.
scary, but facing it head on and getting through it is going to be better than avoiding it in the long run.
Absolutely.
Hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, I think, caregivers, unpaid caregivers, you and I, we're the backbone of caregiving. We can't rely all the time on institutions and systems that are in place and so forth. We're the backbone, and it's shining through with the, over 4 million unpaid caregivers in Canada alone. And in the
Mhm.
States, it's can't even count that. You can't even imagine the number of unpaid caregivers. So it's just a reality, and they're the backbone. And because of that, I think we're at a time or a point in time where, yeah, it's challenging for sure, taking care of somebody or having somebody taken care of. But like we were saying, there's resources out there.
Yeah.
Governments, different organizations are there to kind of help and support, and that's a good thing. Uh, but again, not taking it on your own, as you were saying, is really critical. Looking for, your own network, the community to support. And no, I think my last 2 cents on this is just that you're not alone. You
Yeah.
may feel that you're alone, but your situation, is unfortunately all too common. And there are some supports out there if you just kind of look for them.
Absolutely. And I will say, if anyone is listening to this and they do feel like they are alone in it, reach out to us at Caredera, comment below, or you can find us on social media anywhere. We're happy to point you in the right direction if we're not able to provide those resources ourselves, because we know these conversations can be hard and scary, and planning ahead is not an easy task. But like JP said, you're not alone in this situation, and we'd be happy to support anyone through that situation. So the reality is the families, like you said, are the backbone, or sorry, the family caregivers are the backbone of what's going on, and they're coordinating and supporting and absorbing these gaps that we're talking about. So making sure that they're supported throughout this is most important. Of course, also caring for the individual who needs care as well, but care doesn't affect just one person, it affects the entire family and ultimately communities, societies, the entire world. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. All right.
Yeah, well, thank you everyone for joining us today on It's a Lot, Let's Talk. Thank you for joining us for this conversation on It's a Lot, Let's Talk. If there's one thing to take away from today, it's this. Caregiving doesn't happen in isolation. It reshapes entire families, often quietly, and often without the support that's truly needed. Families are doing more than helping. They're coordinating, adapting, advocating, and holding everything together, often while managing their own lives at the same time. And while the system depends on them, they shouldn't have to carry it alone. If this episode resonated with you, whether you're a caregiver, a healthcare professional, or someone navigating this with your own family, you're not alone in this. We're here to have these conversations openly, honestly, and to start building better ways to support care at home. Thank you for being here, thank you for listening, and thank you for the role you play in care, whatever that looks like. Stay tuned for more episodes, and we'll see you next time.